The war was over, and the Greeks prepared to sail. Their ships, scarred by 10 years of war, were laden with treasure torn from Troy's burning halls. Golden cups, bronze cauldrons, ivory and jewels were heaped upon their decks. Women wept as they were dragged from their homes, wives, daughters and priestesses, the spoils of victory. The men sang with drunken pride, their voices echoing across the shore. But above them the heavens churned. The smoke of Troy still clung to the sky, black as the gods' displeasure. For in their fury the Greeks had broken sacred law. They had dragged Cassandra, Apollo's chosen, from his temple. They had slain Priam upon Zeus's own altar. They had set fire to holy shrines with no reverence for God or spirit. The sea did not lie still. Its surface trembled as if waiting. From his palace beneath the waves, Poseidon watched with anger. The Greeks had desecrated his altars, mocking the sea god who had once raised their walls and guided their ships. His trident struck the deep and the waters roared. Athena too, once their steadfast ally, turned her face away. She remembered her priestess Cassandra dragged by the hair, her cries ignored, her sanctity profaned. The goddess of wisdom grew hard and cold. The men she had guided to victory would now be struck by madness and ruin. So when the Greeks loosed their sails and pushed from the blood-soaked shore, the winds did not guide them home. Dark clouds boiled above, thunder rolled like drums of war, and lightning tore the night sky open. Waves rose higher, white with fury, slamming against the prows of the ships. Some vessels were dashed upon the rocks, splintered like kindling. Others were swallowed whole by the black mouth of the sea. Men cried out to the gods, but their pleas were lost in the storm's rage. Torches fell into the waters, their flames hissing into smoke. Scattered, broken, leaderless, the Greek armada, once so mighty, became a fleet of survivors, each driven to a different fate. Some would crawl back to their kingdoms scarred and bitter. Others would wander strange lands never to return. And so, before the Greeks had even seen the shores of home, the curse of the gods had begun. The storms had broken the Greek armada, scattering it like leaves before the wind. Yet Agamemnon, king of kings, steered his ship through the black waters, and at last beheld the shores of Mycenae. His prow cut the waves, his sails sagged with salt and smoke, and in his hold sat Cassandra, the cursed seer, her eyes heavy with visions of death. The city greeted him with torches and song. His people hailed him as the great conqueror, who had broken Troy, who had brought home its treasures and its captives. Yet behind the walls of the palace another song was being sung, one of vengeance, one of waiting wrath, for Clytemnestra, queen of Mycenae, had counted every year of his absence, every drop of blood spilled in his name. She remembered the day when Agamemnon had called for their daughter, Iphigenia, to be brought to Aulis under the lie of marriage to Achilles. She remembered the altar, the knife, the cries of a child offered to the winds. The king had slain his own daughter to appease the gods, to bring his fleet across the sea. And though he wore his crown in Troy, his wife wore her grief in silence. Now he returned, crowned with victory, but to her eyes he bore the stain of that sacrifice, and the ruin of Troy upon his hands. Clytemnestra greeted him with a smile sweet as honey. She laid soft robes beneath his feet, so he might not walk upon the earth like a mortal man, but like a god. Her words dripped with welcome, her eyes with false warmth. Agamemnon, weary from war, entered his halls without suspicion, but Cassandra trembled, her voice breaking in visions. She saw the shadows waiting, the dagger gleaming, the net prepared to fall. She cried out warnings, her mouth spilling prophecy, but none believed her, as none had ever believed her. The curse of Apollo bound her words, and her truth was taken as madness. So Agamemnon bathed, laying aside his armor, his crown, his guard. In the quiet chamber, as steam curled about him, the queen struck. She cast the woven net upon him, trapping him like a beast. Her hand raised the axe, and the king of kings, who had commanded 1,000 ships, fell not by spear or sword in battle, but by his wife's hand in his own home. Blood ran across the stones of Mycenae, mingling with the waters of the bath. Cassandra too met her fate, her cries silenced by steel. And in that moment, the house of Atreus was stained anew, its curse deepened, its halls echoing with murder. Thus ended Agamemnon, greatest of the Greek kings, not by the Trojans' hand, but by the vengeance of his own blood. Menelaus, lord of Sparta, had gained back the prize for which the war had been fought. Helen, his queen, the woman whose face had launched 1,000 ships, stood once more beside him as his vessel cut through the waves. The war had ended as it began, with her beauty and with his claim, yet the gods had not forgiven. The sea was restless, churning with Poseidon's wrath, and the winds blew wild and strange. Where Agamemnon had met doom upon land, Menelaus was cursed upon the waters. His fleet was driven from course, scattered by storms that rose without warning. Sailors clung to shattered masts, praying to the indifferent sky as lightning split the heavens. Helen, silent upon the deck, seemed untouched by fear. To some she was a curse, the daughter of Zeus, a shadow of divine beauty that brought ruin wherever she went. To Menelaus she was both wound and healing, his pride and his burden. He held her close, though his men muttered of omens and the endless anger of the sea. The waves drove them far from Greece, casting them upon foreign shores. To Cyprus, to Phoenicia, to distant Egypt he wandered, seeking a path home. There in the land of the Nile he found uneasy refuge. The priests of Egypt, wise in the secrets of the gods, told him of the anger of Athena and Poseidon. They counseled him to offer sacrifices, to cleanse the sins of Troy with blood and prayer. Long years passed before the winds turned kind. The fleet diminished, its sails tattered, its men hollow-eyed. At last Menelaus and Helen set their prows toward Sparta. Yet even when they returned, their halls were not filled with joy. The kingdom was haunted by whispers, for no treasure, no queen, no victory could erase the memory of 10 years of slaughter. Menelaus had regained his wife, but at what cost? He had won the war yet lost the peace, and Helen, whose beauty had set the world aflame, walked again through the palace of Sparta, a queen, yet forever marked as the shadow behind the fall of Troy. Among all the Greeks who set sail from Troy, none bore a heavier fate than Odysseus, king of Ithaca. He had been the mind behind the wooden horse, the weaver of cunning plans, the breaker of Troy's gates. His wit had won the war, but the gods do not forget, and Poseidon's anger marked him for suffering. His ship left the smoking ruins of Ilium with hopes of quick return, but the sea denied him. Storms rose without warning, winds howled from every quarter, and the horizon stretched endless and cruel. Each landfall brought new peril, each shore a trial meant to break his will. He came first to the land of the lotus-eaters, where his men tasted the sweet fruit and forgot their homes, their names, their very souls. With fury Odysseus dragged them back to the ships, lashing them to the benches lest they drift into oblivion. Next came the cavern of the Cyclops, Polyphemus. There, with cunning, Odysseus blinded the one-eyed giant and escaped with his men beneath the bellies of sheep. Yet as they fled, pride overcame wisdom, and he shouted his true name to the waves. Polyphemus, groaning in rage, lifted his hands to the sky and called upon his father, Poseidon. From that moment, the sea god swore that Odysseus would wander 10 years more, tasting sorrow upon sorrow. Through the halls of Circe, the enchantress, he passed, where his men were turned to swine. Yet he mastered her spells and lingered in her arms. To the realm of the dead he journeyed, speaking with the shades of heroes and his own mother, learning the doom the gods had woven for him. He lashed himself to the mast to hear the sirens' song, their voices promising bliss and knowledge, while his crew rode on with wax in their ears. He passed between the monsters Scylla and Charybdis, where 6 of his men were snatched screaming from the decks, and still he pressed on, though each trial stripped him of companions, until he alone drifted upon a broken raft. At last, the sea cast him upon the isle of Calypso, a goddess who held him in her arms for 7 long years, offering him immortality if he would stay. Yet his heart never yielded. His mind and soul clung to Ithaca, to his wife Penelope, to his son Telemachus, now grown to manhood without him. So the years wore on, and Odysseus became a tale sung by sailors, the man who had left Troy but could not find his home. His trials became legend, his suffering the price of victory. For in him, more than any other, the Greeks learned the truth, that the war did not end with Troy's burning, but lived on in the endless struggle to return. The ships had sailed, the ruins had cooled, and Troy was no more. Yet the war did not end when the city burned. It lived on, carried back across the sea in the hearts of men. The victors returned not as heroes crowned in glory, but as broken kings haunted by blood and loss. Agamemnon's halls ran red with his own blood, spilled by the queen he had wronged. Menelaus wandered half a world before reclaiming a throne that no longer sang with joy. Odysseus, tossed from shore to shore, suffered storms, monsters, and gods before setting foot once more upon his homeland, and even those who reached their hearths found them altered. Sons had grown into strangers, wives into widows in spirit, kingdoms into shadows of what they had been. Some houses fell to ruin, others to endless feuds, as old curses revived in the wake of Troy's destruction. Among the people, too, the war left scars. 10 years of men gone to battle had left fields untended, harvests thin, and graves too many to count. Mothers wept for sons who never returned. Children grew up with names of fathers they had never seen. Even the gods bore the weight of that war. Their rivalries had deepened, their wrath spilled across the mortal world. Troy had been their battlefield as much as Greece's, and their anger echoed on in storm and famine, in wandering and plague. And so the shadow of Troy stretched far beyond its smouldering stones. It fell upon every hearth, every temple, every heart that remembered those 10 years of blood. For though the Greeks had claimed victory, their triumph was ash, their glory poisoned. The war had begun with the taking of a woman. It had ended with the fall of a city. But its true legacy was sorrow, woven into the fates of all who lived after. Thus the bard sang, Troy was gone. But Troy lived on, in memory, in mourning, in the endless reminder that no mortal may grasp too much glory without paying the price.